Hi, this is Lex, and welcome to the FinTech Blueprint. It's your podcast about fintech, decentralized finance, digital banking, investing, robo-advice, artificial intelligence, and all the other frontier technology that is transforming financial services. To get more content, like an illustrated transcript of this conversation in your inbox, subscribe at fintechblueprint.com. So without further delay, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's conversation. I'm thrilled to have with me the founders of Bastion, a really interesting transaction and Web3 orchestration company, and we'll learn all more about that. Nas and Riyaz have joined and will tell us their story as well as what they're trying to do with the company. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys.
Thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here.
Cool. Well, let's start with just what brought you together. Like, what's your background? How did you meet? And what were some of the things you had maybe in common?
Sure, definitely. So where to start? Nas and I have worked together for, at this point, it's rounding up to a decade. So it's been about 8 years. We actually first met together at this company called Docker, very popular for dev and cloud infrastructure, where we were both on the security team. And so we both were working on container security, operating security, system security, and both of us had come from security backgrounds. Nas had been at Apple, I'd worked at Square and other companies, and we immediately realized that we were working well together as teammates and really enjoying working together, so that when our team manager and tech lead went on to go co-found this company called Anchorage, which is an institutional crypto custodian, and brought myself along as founding engineer, and Nas as well. Early on, we both knew working together again was really exciting. At Anchorage is our first foray into crypto. That was 2017. And so at that point in time, big bull run on Bitcoin, Ethereum, all the ICOs. But what really brought us in, and we shared the same opinion and kind of mindset as we joined Anchorage, and I think it's continued today, is we were really there to help build robust, mature infrastructure for institutions in the space. And so at Anchorage, we worked really closely on all things security, working on getting the first iteration of the product with secure hardware, worked really closely together. At a startup that early, you work just super, super close together, and continue to build our partnership. So from there, you'll notice there's kind of a lot of copy paste in our backgrounds. We've worked together quite extensively. We both went to Facebook, now called Meta, to work on their Libra project. One of our close friends actually was one of the very first developers on the Move language. They had just released their testnet, but they needed a lot of help when it came to wallet infrastructure and custody, which we were really excited to jump into because we were previously at Anchorage working on institutions, the scale being moving hundreds of millions of dollars in a few transactions per day, got flipped on its head. And now we were working on Facebook scale, 3 billion users, tons of transactions per day, but maybe at a smaller amount, $10. But still, even then, security being and safety being uber important. And then, of course, scalability. So we were at Facebook working through Libra.
Let me just stop you for a second there, because I want to define the word security. Like, what does it even mean to make something secure? And what does that mean for working at Docker or Anchorage or Meta? Like, those must be quite different things that you have to focus on.
Definitely. For us, security, it's interesting because it is very different across each of those companies and environments and products. And ultimately for us, the end goal of working in security is the same, which is bringing safety to users, where you don't have to worry about being hacked, where what you're being hacked of course, is different based on the environment, whether it's in crypto, like at Anchorage or Facebook. With Libra, it's funds. At Docker, it's potentially API keys or other sensitive data that you're running in the cloud. And so, of course, with each of these environments, very different threat model and set of systems to work with and secure. But the way that we think about it is across any environment, thinking about it systematically. It's almost like economics of what does it take for an attacker to break into the system? How much time, money, effort will it take them? And in exchange, what do they get back in return? So for example, if you don't have a very secure system and it's trivially easy to attack the system or get some help from a third party 0-day on a dark market for a couple $1,000s, but as an attacker in exchange you're able to extract millions of dollars of value, that's an easy bet for them and an easy decision to go make that attack, even if it takes some time for them. Whereas if you make your system more difficult and less of an attractive target versus something else, that will defer attackers from going after your system, or even in some cases, you'll obviously block them or monitor and detect them in your system and be able to respond in a way to prevent the attack. Regardless of how your system looks or what you're protecting, thinking about it in this framework helps think through systematically where should we invest time and resources on our side to build security versus what is too fringe or actually not helping the system and might just be snake oil.
There is something kind of comforting actually about the idea that, like the malevolent actors that are trying to attack the various internet systems are like hyper rational and doing a cost benefit analysis of like, is it worth the time and the risk, to go after this honeypot versus this honeypot? That it's not just sort of chaos and black swans everywhere, but that these are fairly organized actors who are trying to essentially generate like economic outcome for themselves through stealing and fraud and so on. But nonetheless, I guess, is that true? And especially if you think about like the types of people you would have to secure anchorage against versus the types of people and organization you'd have to secure Facebook against, like how rational and predictable were these adversaries?
It's interesting you bring that up because one piece that I didn't touch on that I think this example and thinking through these two companies, but more broadly, a very large globally known brand versus, another company or different environment is the one variable that's very difficult to quantify is reputation. And so when I say quantify, I mean in the context of the economic return for the attacker, right? So many companies or countries, whatever it may be, obviously there's other political or other forces at play that some attackers just want to go after a certain big brand or a certain set of certain groups. There's obviously also, as part of reputation for a company like Facebook that's publicly traded, other implications about what you can do as an attacker and try to manipulate potentially market prices. And so that's the one area that it is very tricky to bring back to this framework and make it science instead of more of an art. So I will caveat that. So I think that's to your question where it does differ, but I think across the board, thinking through how do you weave that variable in, still at the end goal of keeping end users safe and thinking through your own threat model. And then of course, the ultimate goal is making this invisible so that you can build great products on top of security and security doesn't get in the way of the product experience.
Fascinating stuff. I want to ask all sorts of questions about Libra, of course. And maybe we can kind of meditate just there for a second. I'm sure that it was a strange time. I guess, how did you square the independent and sort of decentralized interests of the crypto movement and then the financial aspects, the sort of inherent economic and financial aspects of crypto infrastructure with the types of things that Facebook was focused on at the time, and sort of famously it was picked out by the regulators as a punching bag to, stop private stablecoins and all these things. Can you share any sort of the maybe emotion or experience of like, how did these decentralized ideas and themes land within Facebook and in the Libra project? And then how was it able to evolve eventually to what happened?
The way we thought about it, and I think that this is really the genesis of Bastion to a certain extent, is it's very important for the base layer to be extremely decentralized because the base layer enables the bootstrap of trust, essentially, between any party, whether those are companies, whether those are individuals, whether those are automated systems, right? And so the way we thought about it is the base layer needs to be decentralized, but there needs to be a pragmatic approach to decentralization, right? Because trust, decentralization essentially is related to trust, and trust is a spectrum, not a binary choice, right? It's not either I don't trust you or I fully trust you. There's always kind of like a range to it. And the way we were really thinking about it as part of the Libra project was really, let's be pragmatic, essentially. Let's try to enable bridges between companies that really struggled building bridges between their different ecosystems before that, and enabling a large distribution of users across the globe to get access to essentially an already more decentralized version. And the idea there was really building progression to it. And, I think that there were a lot of things that were really paving the way essentially for more decentralization being built on top of, the Libra project progressively. And I do think that those did not die with the project. We actually saw amazing teams, spin out of, for example, the blockchain and kind of like network building part of the organization to Misten Labs, to Aptos, and I think that on the infrastructure side, we're extremely proud to be bringing actually all the key learnings essentially of integrating with decentralized infrastructure, but in a way that is extremely pragmatic and actually enables users to still get the best of Web2 while having the broader reach of Web3 essentially. So that was really, I do think that pragmatism was really kind of like a key learning there. And a lot of people have built, infrastructure that is dedicated to this pragmatism, essentially, pragmatic approach.
I think there's some very powerful components that are now part of Web3 that have come out of the Libra project, including the Move language, as well as the Aptos and Sui layer 1 ecosystems. And like you say, like talented teams trying things in a different way. One thing that was always kind of tricky for me with Libra was it was positioned so strongly as the dollar or like an alternative dollar, this basket of the dollar and the euro and international currencies to resist inflation. And a lot of the packaging was also sort of in this super app moment when Ant Financial, had payments and a giant $1 trillion money market fund. And everybody was talking about how things like Venmo would be inside of WhatsApp and so on. And yet what has survived seems to me much more like fast and more formally encoded decentralized computation rather than kind of a shot at stablecoins or money. Why do you think it started in this way, aiming at building a currency? And why do you think it ended in the way that it has, kind of prioritizing computation?
Yeah, it's interesting. And honestly, part of it really was product market fit with mainstream, right? How do you bring Web3 crypto into the billions of people who haven't used it yet, and in a way that they understand and can use it without getting tripped up on all of the trickiness and subtleties of blockchain? And so back then, financial use cases, remittances. Fast forward to today, we have social identity, more experiences with Web3 being enabled. And it's interesting for Nas and myself, having seen this evolution, having seen Web3 become a term, right? Beyond just people thinking about speculation and financial use cases. And it's a lot of how we think about Bastion, is putting the user first, putting the product first, making it invisible, but still harnessing all of the goodness and power of blockchains to be able to build tools for product builders to go build on top and build whatever the app may be, whether it is like a Venmo, like a DM or Libra, or whether it's enabling NFT marketplaces or loyalty programs, subscriptions. We've really seen this explosion of actual use cases that really excite us and brought us really to build Bastion and really think about how do we enable these products and all of these new experiences that businesses want to bring to their customers and their users. And how do we build it so that the security is taken care of, the compliance pieces are taken care of, and so we can really focus on that top layer of usability, because I think that's a lot of where the industry has been going about how to think through different ways to abstract away all the complexity. And at Bastion, that's really our rallying cry, is how do we enable the best products to be built beyond just financial use cases. And so I think, a few years ago, it was very focused on financial. You had DeFi Summer, but fast forward to today, there's just so much more, and definitely saw that there's a big opportunity for us to help bring that to life.
Before we open up Bastion, I do want to ask you about your experience at Andreessen, because after Facebook, you both went on to the venture firm Andreessen Horowitz to focus on, I guess, as technologists and residents around the crypto space. Is that right?
That's right. So
it's super interesting and very much of the moment, right? So between 21 and 23 is really this explosion in NFTs and consumer use and culture and media around the space. And then, of course, the great collapse, deleveraging, and dire hopelessness that a lot of people in the space have accomplished. Can you share a little bit more about what that experience was like, going from a very sort of operating execution role to now being exposed to the masses, the throngs of companies that want to raise from Andreessen? Like, what kinds of things surprised you maybe about what you saw? And then let's just open that up. Was there anything that in the trend, in the exposure to many ideas, was surprising to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the part that was very interesting at Facebook was really doing the work on a day-to-day, and kind of like moving to Andreessen Horowitz, having the ability essentially to zoom in and out essentially on a daily basis, kind of like, 30,000 feet view, and then kind of like zooming in and being on, jumping into the calls to talk about product, to talk about security, to talk about, hiring plans essentially to tackle really things that generally haven't been done in the past. And so the part that was extremely interesting there is really seeing the shift from, I would say, kind of a research-focused approach that we had seen for a while, including at our time at Anchorage and working with protocols, but now actually seeing people thinking about product, thinking about ecosystems that do provide the ability for product builders to enable experiences or building experiences themselves. And so it was a very large shift to see these accomplished, oftentimes extremely accomplished product builders kind of take on, great visions, very bold visions in the space to revolutionize different categories, whether those were loyalty programs, whether those were financial services, really building infrastructure that would start feeling a lot more like Web2. Because if you think about the task that a lot of these companies have, is essentially competing with traditional Web2 businesses. And so their goal there was bringing that to market with a great user experience, with a great security, with a great compliance, in oftentimes, unfortunately, I would say a climate that is not as clear to them in terms of kind of guidelines. And so I think that just helping them navigate that was really extremely rewarding for us. Just seeing these businesses that actually want to create value for the users rather than focusing on research aspects.
Going back to the earlier theme of security and safety, where did their stuff break? Kind of the clear answer is, well, there was user error, then there was people putting things into machines that they didn't understand could be manipulated financially. And then there's the capital gains and losses of having money in the market. But all of those are very connected to sort of money and asset movement. What is it that you saw in terms of the many different companies that Andreessen had touched where you said, okay, there are patterns here in terms of what's going wrong, in terms of what is insecure and what people just aren't getting?
It's actually extremely interesting because the vast majority of the time, it was traditional. We would spend the vast majority of our time going over traditional Web2 security and best practices across corporate security, across operational security. And those are really the key learnings that, we saw in the space, and where we could bring also a tremendous amount of value, having seen different aspects of Web2 security, both at, Docker and, Apple and different companies that we're part of, but really bringing that again to a place where it is safe to get those products out there. There are a lot of companies that were actually extremely afraid to move into building, and they didn't know exactly where to start. They knew that they wanted to connect their users, for example, to blockchains. What was, for example, the solution that would help them get their users connected in a safe and a secure way? And a lot of the time it takes knowledge about, asset support, framework, and key management, and a lot of other things that are extremely complex. And it is also one of the main reasons why we decided to start Bastion transparently, is that it was pretty clear that a lot of companies basically didn't want to take on all the responsibility of building extremely secure systems throughout kind of like key management and user management aspects. So I would say that oftentimes it really came down to traditional Web2 security that seemed to be a friction point. And similarly, on the engineering side, a lot of the time, kind of traditional best practices when it comes to software architecture and engineering seem to be the place where we had the biggest impact within the portfolio whenever advising.
So let's move forward to the founding and the mission of Bastion, the new company. What is it, and what are you trying to do?
As Nas was alluding to, we had this idea. We were at Facebook. The seeds were planted about this infrastructure and how to build for products that are just super usable and can scale to Web2 while leveraging the best of Web3. At Andreessen Horowitz, by zooming out and in and out, we saw so many amazing teams and founders that were looking, and partners to the portfolio that were looking for exactly this infrastructure. And it really validated how we were thinking about eventually going to start Bastion. And so we knew we were uniquely positioned, just given our experience in the space, having seen security at institutional scale, at larger scale. And we went out to go build Bastion. And our main focus at Bastion is we are building infrastructure so that our customers, whether they're small businesses, enterprises, can build experiences that feel like Web2 that you're used to, but leverage the best of Web3, and do so, of course, as we were discussing, securely, in a way that is in compliance with where they operate, and in a way that's just super simple. Because I think the space, there's a lot of amazing technology, but making it easy and simple and being able to just build right on top to build a product that faces end users is really where we want to be able to enable that. So that's the super high level of Bastion. Excited to dig in more today, but really been validated and shaped by our experience along the way.
Yeah, let's double click on it, because these words are sometimes difficult for people to understand. So like, is it a custodian? Does it spin up a bunch of non-custodial wallets on your behalf? Is it APIs on top of node infrastructure? What is orchestration? Any of these things. Assume we don't know at all what these words mean.
Let's dive right in. So the way we think about Bastion, really philosophically, we knew from looking at the space that there was more than just key management that was blocking these great products from being built. At this point, we really think that spinning up, creating wallets, creating keys is already, if not, it will become a commodity. But even then, it doesn't really get you past the starting line. And what can you do with those keys long term? What can you build for experiences? So we think about Bastion today as a platform with three main pillars. So first pillar, we'll dig into it, is custodial wallet API. And we pick custodial. We've built custodial a few times over, and really believe it brings the best user experience to the product that gets built on top. A couple of quick examples where it gets illustrated is, so firstly, when it comes to key recovery, with custodial wallets, users don't have to think about seed phrases. They don't have to understand encrypted MPC shards. it really becomes as simple as a forgot password button that you're used to today, because we are the custodian, we're holding the key securely on our systems. It's our responsibility to always keep it and not lose it, and so you can recover it. Another area, an example where custodial really shines, and I'm sure everyone on this call has probably had this experience where you're going to do some interaction with your wallet and you're clicking like 7 times on like the pop-up that comes up on your Chrome browser or whatever browser you're using, whatever wallet, because you're individually approving every single on-chain transaction. You don't even know what half of them are because there might be some bridging or some other approval that is not incredibly clear to you as the user. You're seeing hex strings and just bytes of data. And with custodial, we can abstract that into a single API call, into really thinking about, for our customers, our businesses that we work with, how do we give them dead simple APIs that make it as like a product, a user journey or a product flow, as opposed to thinking through every single on-chain transaction and making it really, exposing all those details that, quite frankly, we believe that most people shouldn't even have to know about.
Double clicking on kind of like the user journey, I think that everyone starts somewhere, and the vast majority of the people on Earth are going to start in traditional Web2. The vast majority of their lives online revolve around whether that's a TikTok, an Instagram, Hulu, Venmo, whatever the case might be. This is the bar, right, for adoption. Anything that has more friction than that is not going to get adoption. So our goal is really, let's build the best onboarding. And oftentimes the best onboarding is just no onboarding at all. And custodial wallets essentially enable that. And then let's build a user journey for them. And so as part of our platform, we definitely understand that at some point people are going to graduate essentially into self-custody. And so this is also something that we're including as part of our platform, the ability to export the keys and over time kind of like add additional mechanisms around that. But really, it's a user journey, and it starts somewhere, and we want to make sure that we build a product for where people start, not for where they're going to be, probably 5 to 7 years from now.
You're building a product for, I assume, developers to build on top of you, right?
Brands and businesses, essentially, enterprise businesses building on top of us. Exactly.
What is the shape of that developer? Like, are they an existing footprint that's trying to maybe automate or outsource some part of the things that they do for themselves already? Or, are they new developers that are integrated into Alchemy or Infura and then are adding an additional integration into you? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, great question. So we actually have things across the entire spectrum. So we have some, quite a few companies essentially and brands building net new experiences in Web3 and want a way to easily connect their users essentially to the, to the blockchain in a way that feels safe and in a way that feels native to their day-to-day digital lives. We also have quite a few customers that kind of started somewhere, oftentimes on the self-custody side, whether self-custodial via, letting people use, whether that's a MetaMask or Phantom or other, Chrome extensions and want to, basically broaden the reach that they have, because I feel like, transparently between people here, it's almost like we onboarded every single person who was willing to install a Chrome extension for self-custody. And so, the goal is really getting past that and getting to the the broader market. So we've seen a bit of everything, honestly. People who were both kind of building experiences from scratch and people who already had experiences from scratch and, experienced firsthand essentially the frustration and the friction for their own users.
Can you give an example of, how it would work in a flow, in a user flow?
Yeah, definitely. So essentially, the way it works is we want to enable businesses to issue wallets in a seamless way to their own users. The vast majority of the time, our customer base doesn't even want to have their users know that the blockchain wallet has been created for them. So you take Lex, essentially, going on, imagine a Nike.com, essentially, that would be integrated with Bastion. You go on Nike.com, you use your traditional authentication method on a Nike, for example, whether that's a social account, it could be sign in with Gmail, it could be with Facebook, it could be with Twitter, it could be Nike's own authentication mechanisms. And once authenticated, Nike could essentially call our APIs to create the wallet on your behalf and create the user profile in our systems so that we understand Lex. And we can actually create, based on the needs of the user experience, multiple wallets, potentially on multiple chains, so that we at Bastion kind of build this holistic understanding of Lex across chains, across multiple wallets, just like all of us here probably have 7 to 10 different credit cards. And so that's really the goal here, just building an understanding of the user and easily issue wallet to the end users. And once Lex, for example, wants to buy something, whether that's a digital pass to unlock discounts and user experience and so on, behind the scenes during the purchase flow, the NFT can get essentially minted by your wallet via Bastion APIs. So it's really up to our customers essentially to decide how much to expose to the front end, to the end user. But oftentimes, a lot of them actually don't even want that to be exposed. They don't want to use the word blockchain. They don't want to use the word NFTs. They basically only want people to have digital profiles and for them to have passes and different items.
Got it. Okay. So you are programmatically creating accounts across different chains based on flows that an existing experience, consumer experience might have. And you mentioned one of the things, for example, that goes away or gets simplified in that is, well, like if I have some transaction on some decentralized application with MetaMask, that application is very polite. It's like, hey, thanks for coming to Aave. Can I touch your money? Yes, no. Can I touch this particular money? Yes, no. Now that you want to trade, are you sure that you want to trade? Can I do that trade? And then waiting for the confirmation. And then now you've got the confirmation. If you want to trade some other asset, it's going to be like, hey, can I touch that money? It's annoying for sure, especially for somebody in Web2 who's used to saying things like, sign in with Plaid and here's all my stuff. Like, enjoy my username and password, random fintech application to all my bank accounts. It's a very different experience. But it's of course like a trade-off between convenience and at least the feeling of security that we keep talking about. In your architecture, it's not that you suppress it, but you put it into an API flow, all of these requests. How's that handled? Because you're still going to have accounts that, if they were to interact with some smart contract, they would need to, be permissioned and authenticated, and you need to sign all the stuff anyway. So how does that work in the setup that you've built?
Totally. Security is obviously super important. And so the way we've designed the system and the way you put it, politeness, it's interesting. I'd say the politeness might be too generous. There's also just annoying and ability to shoot yourself in the foot because you don't maybe realize what is going on with those, individual transactions when you have 7 of them in a row. So the way we view it is we want to understand our users and our business's intent and be able to authenticate that and use it in our systems. And then an area that we haven't touched yet, but I think is a great transition now that we've covered, and we're kind of getting into the APIs and we're getting into the flows, is because we're custodial, we can do this, is we have this, what we call a smart transaction routing system. And at the very high level is at Bastion, we see an incoming transaction, a user intent for a flow. We can understand and answer the question, what actually needs to happen on chain? So for example, if you and I are both, customers of a customer of Bastion, and I want to send you an NFT, and you aren't going to use that NFT immediately on a smart contract interaction or go trade it, that could actually happen instantly and free of gas without any gas being spent in our system. And again, because we've authenticated user intent, going back to your question, we can authenticate the APIs through the system, make it super seamless and instant, feel like Web2, but be able to make it just super convenient and handle the routing. Also with the routing, I mentioned on-chain and off-chain, but also we can get to a point where we understand between chains, which chain makes the most sense for a certain transaction. You have tokens that are represented, USDC, for example, on multiple chains. And our vision is that the blockchain becomes the settlement rails, and we can post to settlement eventually when it makes sense. But for many of these transactions that happen in between when you open a non-custodial wallet today and are approving a transaction, many of those could actually happen off-chain for us because we're custodial and own all the the assets in our infrastructure and make it super seamless for the user. So the smart transaction routing system really takes the best of the custodial pieces and that authenticated intent and is able to convert it into better user experiences, but also cost savings for the business, not thinking about how much gas is being spent or volatility of gas all the time.
And how do you think about being a custodian? What's required? The context, of course, is that there's generations, there's quite fast turnover in folks building custodial services in our space, and some of the names that were kind of sterling just a couple of years ago, whether it's, Prime Trust or BitGo or any number of others, have been challenged in staying relevant and keeping up, right? While others, of course, have done really well. So how are you thinking about that part of it? And what are you doing to really make that custodial promise really strong and clean to the user?
Of course. And Nas and I have seen the full gamut, both building it firsthand, but then, of course, the other players in the space. There's obviously the base set of you're the custodian handling other people's money. It means there's a certain bar when it comes to security, understanding the compliance regulations, which we've done a few times over. And the way we see Bastion is we've seen what it takes to build that, and I've done it before. And we know that beyond just the financial, and many of the custodians, right, are serving institutions, are really focused on that market. And we're focused really on product builders. And we think that there's a new area here where being custodial and having APIs and tools for developers to use is a huge unlock for the space and really is worth the added costs and effort on our end of building a custodial system versus pushing security or liability right to the end users and being non-custodial or self-custodial. And so really focused on how do we get the best user experience and help builders build the best product. And that led us to being a custodian. And like I was just talking about the smart transaction routing system, that's enabled because we're a custodian. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to, as a non-custodial provider, understand how to orchestrate these flows in our system. And then there's a third pillar we haven't talked about just yet, but I'd like to get to is how we think about user insights and data, which we can dig into. But really, being custodial opens up beyond just simple APIs, so much more on top that really caters to building the best products.
We are coming up on time, so I want to give you the opportunity to talk about data, but I also have a tricky question for you. So we'll see which one we'll do. And the question is, let's say you are 100% super successful, and from now on, every single Web2 organization, starting with Meta and all the way, through Google and Apple, are like, this is the perfect partnership. Every single Andreessen company uses you to spin up Web3 accounts. And all of a sudden, you are sitting on a custodial ownership of this enormous amount of financial and personal data and all these assets, and arguably at some point, trillions of assets, which would make a very novel kind of company, right? Like it's a Vanguard, but much more personal with the storage of every digital asset imaginable. Have you thought about that endpoint? Like, once you're there, is the answer to try and decentralize that into a protocol and try to kind of diffuse some of the natural monopoly that comes with that? Or is it, if that happens, fantastic, we can finally have success at scale?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The way we think about it again is this user journey that starts essentially with delegating a lot of the responsibility and the building kind of like the safety on my day-to-day to a separate company, right? For example, I know that Apple is much better than me at hardware security. I'm not going to rebuild my own hardware and try to include kind of like all the security features as part of it, right? So I'm going to delegate that to Apple. But the way we think about it is, again, users should have a path to graduate from custody to self-custody over time. And again, we're kind of like starting right off the bat with the ability for end users to export their keys the moment they feel comfortable enough to take on the responsibility of securing, the seed phrases for their own wallet. But again, people didn't like passwords. They're not going to like seed phrases. That's kind of like our raw guess, I would say. They're having spent quite a bit of time dealing with both. And so I would say that it's important, again, to start somewhere, to provide a safe way for them to operate in the space, and then give them mechanisms essentially to graduate from this custody essentially. It doesn't mean essentially that the everything else falls apart, but now they can make the decision of what they get, with the custodial offering and with the self-custody of their own assets. And always, decentralization, just like privacy, just like security, never lives in a vacuum, right? It's decentralization against other things, against user experience, against kind of costs of interactions, and so on. So that's kind of how we've conceptualized it so far.
It's, I think, a really needed step function to get from how people think about the internet and what the internet could be in the future, but is perhaps a bit too alien for most of us today. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. If our audience wants to learn more about you or about Bastion, where should they go?
Bastion.com. That's the best place. And again, Lex, thank you so much for having us. It's been amazing being able to just discuss all things crypto, Bastion, of course, and everything in between. And really, really thankful this came together.
Awesome. Nas, Riyaz, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. That's it for this week's episode of the FinTech Blueprint. For more technical deep dives into all things FinTech and decentralized finance, check out fintechblueprint.com and grab a free subscription to the newsletter. This is Lex, and I'll see you next time.